Hello, and a very warm welcome everyone to our today's webinar on stereoisomeric drugs and bioanalysis. I am Yuvragi Chandeli, and I represent Vida Clinical Research, one of the largest independent CROs in India, offering its clients a wide range of comprehensive clinical services, ranging from BA/B studies, PK studies, to patient-based trials, biosimilars, biopharmaceutics, regulatory services, and much more. As your facilitator today, I would like to introduce you all to a couple of points before we begin this session. This session will have a presentation in the beginning and followed by a panel discussion in the end. We will also be running a live Q&A during the webinar, which will be led by a panelist, Dr. Tulsidas Mishra, who is a PhD in bioanalytical chemistry with over 18 years of experience with expertise in method development and validation of small and large molecules. Along with him, Dr. Ajay Gupta, who is a PhD in bioanalytical chemistry with over 19 years of experience and with expertise in method development and validation of complex generic molecules and NCEs. So for all your questions and queries, we have enabled our Ask a Question feature. It's right on your screen. So you can drop your questions in there. Now, moving on, I would like to introduce you all to our presenter for today's session, Mr. Primal Sharma. He's a PhD in bioanalytical chemistry with over 15 years of vast experience. He's also having over 20 publications in different international peer-reviewed journals, and few of them are on bioanalysis of stereoisomeric drugs like ibuprofen and metoprolol. Currently, he's associated with Vida as principal scientist in bioanalytical department. His expertise lies in method development and validation of complex generics, which involves liposomal formulation, vitamins, and endogenous molecules. He has faced several regulatory audits for different agencies like US FDA, EU, WHO, and has also played a key role in establishment of Shimadzu mass spectrometric platform at Vida. So without taking much of your time, I would like to virtually call upon Mr. Primal to begin this session. Over to you, Mr. Primal.
Thank you, Yuragi, for such a nice introduction. Hello, friends and dear colleagues. I welcome you all to our latest webinar on stereoisomeric drugs and bioanalysis. Stereoisomeric drugs are of large significance when it comes to drug development. If we study them properly, the drug which can fail at a later stage will qualify as a lead. And when we talk about the bioanalysis, there are a lot of hiccups when we have to see the enantiomeric separation. So we'll be discussing points regarding what the chirality is. We'll classify the chiral compounds and we'll discuss that what are different classifications, how different classification and different chiralities exist, how drug development is impacted by the chirality, at what stage of chirality, how and what we can identify, what are different regulatory aspects which are required at the development phase, and how US FDA and EMA looks into when we submit such drugs which have racemization and also have the chiral centers. In terms of bioanalysis, we'll discuss the historical perspective, how chirality gained such emphasis that it is very much important when we talk about bioanalysis. And we'll discuss case studies on a few of the molecules where chiral separation has been performed at Vida. We'll share Vida capabilities, how we can handhold our sponsors and can help them in the difficulties of method development for chiral molecules. And there will be question and answers where we'll be happy to answer your questions. Starting with the term chirality. Chirality was first introduced by Louis Pasteur in 1848 when he separated two isomers of sodium ammonium tartrate. The isomerism, when we talk about it, is defined as similar molecular formula and different chemical structures. As we see, there are two isomeric formations we have shown. One is levo and dextro, and the other is R and S. Where R and S is known as absolute configuration, whereas levo and dextro is a relative configuration. This R and S stages in the manner that the priority of rotation of a molecule, if there is a priority for one, then rotation happens in the right direction, then the molecule is called as R isomer. And if due to the priority of the atoms attached to the carbon are in the left, then we call them as S enantiomer. Similarly, for the levo and dextro, the plane of polarization of light matters, and thus they are denoted as levo and dextro rotations or levo and dextro isomers of the molecule. Taking broadly to the chirality and the classification, when a compound has same molecular formula, then they are called as isomers. But if they do not have, they are not isomers. This isomerism is further divided into two parts, that is constitutional isomerism, when the compound have same connectivity for a particular atom or a functional group, whereas with the similar structure which is similar to that, and further thus if we have the same connectivity, then we call it stereoisomer. If it is not, then it is constitutional. Further to the stereoisomerism, it is divided into two parts, that is configurational and conformational isomerism. Configurational isomerism is divided into geometric isomerism based on the double bond, and if there is no double bond, then it is led to the optical isomerism, where if we observe the superimposable images, then they are called as enantiomers, and if there is no superimposable mirror images, then they are diastereomers. We'll be talking further each of the individual classifications with some of the examples further. Constitutional isomerism. Structural isomers are molecules that have identical chemical formula but a different order of atomic bonds. As we take an example, isoflurane and enflurane. For these two molecules, when we see, we have the atom of chlorine attached to oxygen directly and then separately. So since the bond is attached differently, but this molecule has the same chemical formula and also the molecular formula, the chemical formula and the molar mass. On the other hand, the dihydrocoordinane and dobutamide is having similar chemical formula, but they have different actions. They behave in a different manner. So these are constitutional isomers. The other is category falls under conformational isomers, which is under stereoisomerism. Conformational isomers are stereoisomers that can be converted into one another by rotation around a single bond. We have taken an example of chlorpromazine over here. When we see that a chain of nitrogen, when it is on the upper side and the chlorine on opposite side, then it is one form of isomerism. When both are on the same side, then it is another form. Now what happens is, because of this transformation of the side chain of which is located at nitrogen, the active conformation is the one which has the side chain where the chlorine and the nitrogen are on the same side. So this is the way the overall there is a change in conformation can impact your activity of the molecule, and the isomerism thus has a large significance when it comes to development or synthesis of a molecule and identifying a conformation of the molecule, how much conformations exists. Another set of isomerism is geometric isomerism. We have taken the example of cis-phytonadiene and trans-phytonadiene. So what geometric isomerism exists as that there is a double bond or a ring structure, and the atom attached to or the group attached to it, there is a change in its position. We can see there is a methyl group attached to the double bond, and this is cis-phytonadiene. When this methyl group is rotated on the upper side, it is trans-phytonadiene. Similar chemical formula than the molar mass, but the cis isomer is considered to have low bioactivity, and because of this, the inactive cis phytonadiene is to be measured. Though it is inactive, we have to measure it because it shows the low bioactivity, and thus can impact the pharmacological effect of the racemate phytonadiene. Optical isomerism is another form of stereoisomerism where R and S notation is generally used, where R is for rectus. This is a Latin word which states right, and it depends on the relative direction of priority of order to the clockwise direction, or when we talk about S isomerism, it is anti-clockwise direction. The R and S structures are mirror images of each other and are referred as enantiomers. We have taken example of S-ketamine and R-ketamine. We can see that the methyl group attached to amine group is rotating, and because of this, the R-ketamine is more potent antidepressant than S-ketamine. As we see the classification and we move to drug development, there is a complete correlation of chirality into it. When we list out the marketed synthetic drugs, there are 60% of the drugs which are currently in use and are chiral compounds. And 88% of these chiral synthetic drugs are used as therapeutic racemates. So we can see that how there is a large chunk of drugs which we are taking as racemates. The knowledge of stereoisomerism in drug levels in body fluid allows us to understand the absorption, distribution, excretion, and toxicological behavior. As we take a racemate drug and we know that there is enantiomerism in this drug, and there will be a behavioral change. There would be more absorption for one isomer and the other will be absorbed later. So the distribution among the body tissues will be changed. The excretion, one isomer will eliminate further and the other will eliminate later. So based on that, we will be able to understand that because of this, we are having more and prolonged pharmacological effect of this. If any of the isomer is behaving toxicology, it forms any of the metabolite which is toxic. So that can be understood if we have the stereoisomeric knowledge of the particular drug. The pharmacokinetics of the drug would be understood better, and it will help us to understand the behavior of the drug. The optimization of pharmacotherapy would be easier. We can easily decide that if we are dosing an inactive isomer, then we can develop a single enantiomer and we can dose that. So a lower dose can be administered, and because of with the help of that, we are able to optimize the dose levels. We are able to understand the therapeutic, metabolic, and the toxicological effect in a better manner. If we are dosing a single enantiomer, we are able to interpret the patient compliance. We are able to understand that if the drug has been dosed and a patient has a complication, what could be the reason? We do not have to specifically go into the stereoisomeric behavior of the drug and have to doubt on what might have gotten wrong. A better bioavailability and bioequivalence would be available for the molecule. Just to understand that why it is important, we have taken the example of conformational isomerism. Just to assume, we have taken a drug with two functional groups of X and Y, which are located to a carbon atom, and this X and Y group are essential for the biological activity. Further, this drug is capable of binding into 3 different receptors or their subtypes. Within this scenario, it would be quite beneficial if we are able to determine that the drug is binding to 3 receptors in similar or distinct conformation. To understand that if there are 2 conformations where if these functional groups are binding, we are having the beneficial effect of antihypertensive and the hypoglycemic effect, whereas the other conformation binds to a receptor which produces a side effect. So what happens? The conformation A binds to receptor 1, it produces the desired antihypertensive effect. The conformation B binds to another receptor and it produces hypoglycemic effect. But the conformation C is the reason for the side effect. Thus, during the synthesis process or during the further proceeding in drug development, if we are able to lock the molecule in either conformation A or B, then we are able to elicit only the desired beneficial effect without any side effect. So it is a very basic thing that we can say that as we are able to control the conformations, we will not have the side effect and the drug would be very feasible to be able to qualify as a possible lead. When we are in drug development phase, what we can expect? In the drug discovery phase, when we are qualifying a drug lead, we study it properly, we understand that there is a chirality, the behavior exists in this way, what kind of enantiomerism exists. If the enantiomerism is known, we will be able to understand whether from the high throughput screening, are we expecting any of the toxicological behavior for the enantiomers or the further metabolism? If yes, the drug will fail itself in the initial level. If there is any no identified side effects, then we will qualify it as a possible lead. If there is evidence of chiral inversion, then we can study that chiral inversion. We can study the toxicological behavior of the chiral inversion. say we developed S-ibuprofen and we understand that there is a parallel inversion to R. So if though we know that the ibuprofen is not having any kind of toxicological behavior at present when dosed appropriately, but if there is a toxicological behavior, we will be able to understand that this chiral inversion was the reason, and the drug is expected to fail at some stage of development. Once the drug is qualified as the possible lead, it enters into the preclinical phase where the appropriate study of the pharmacokinetic behavior and the pharmacodynamic effect will help us in understanding its chiral inversion. At the same point, we will be able to understand that which enantiomer is responsible for the desired pharmacological effect. At the same point, what is the reason of the prolonged effect of the drug if we are observing. If there is a early elimination, then we can understand that, okay, the drug is metabolizing faster or the other things in that phase. Further, the mechanism of action can be understood in terms of, as we are talking more on chirality, that the particular enantiomer is responsible for the action and the other is inactive. We can optimize the therapy, we can decrease the dose, all those things. Once it enters into from the preclinical phase to the clinical phase, if we have developed a single enantiomer, we can perform the proper assessment into humans. We can look into the PK and PD of the enantiomers needed to be compared with the racemate and the animal studies. If we have a racemate already, we can only perform the bridging studies and we can correlate the data. And with the lesser clinical studies, we will be able to submit the data into regulatory for a single enantiomer. So as per US FDA regulatory authority, when we have a single enantiomer, what we need to do, we need to understand the pharmacological effect and in vivo inversion, which when established, it is qualified as a single enantiomer. We need to further understand the pharmacology and the toxicology and evaluate to determine the existing racemate knowledge can be applied or not. If we are going with a single enantiomer, we are submitting the regulatory, they will always go back and see the racemate data. If the racemate data is helpful, they will be correlating the data, and if the data are similar, they will be much more confident on the submitted single enantiomer. If we are going for a racemate, the FDA says that it is essential to determine concentration of each isomer and define the limits of all isomeric components and impurities. At the same point, if the minor difference is observed in the activity and the deposition of enantiomer, racemates can be developed. Further, PK should be studied for both isomers in phase 1. The NC has been developed, we qualified it from the preclinical phase. Now we have to have the data of both isomers, and that has to be submitted whenever we are submitting a racemate. If there is a switch from racemate to enantiomer, then we need to submit the evaluation, which should include an assessment of conversion to other isomer. PK evaluation of single enantiomer should be done, and that data has to be submitted to the US FDA regulatory. Further, as per the EU regulatory aspect, if there is a single enantiomer or racemate, they have one defined parameter, three defined clear parameters. That is, the possibility of formation of other enantiomer in vivo should be considered in relation to the chemical structure. The choice of racemate rather than a single enantiomer needs to be justified. They clearly state that you have to justify that why you want to go with the racemate and not with a single enantiomer. And that is why we observe that for many of the EU studies, we prefer to go with the enantiomeric analysis even though the molecule is racemate and we have some data. Or sometimes when we are not aware, we go with the enantiomeric analysis. For single enantiomer or racemate efficacy studies, have to be performed and should be considered on case-to-case basis. Further, from racemate to enantiomer switch, they consider the EMA it as a completely new application, and it requires a full dossier with suitable bridging studies to decrease the new clinical conduct. These bridging studies help us for them to understand that the behavior is same and this data can be correlated. Further, the PK evaluation of single enantiomer is a necessary part of it. as we move ahead and once the drug has been developed, it is into the market, the other phase is bioanalysis of these drugs. The bioanalytical chemistry is the qualitative and quantitative analysis of these drugs, which in the substances of biological fluids such as blood, plasma, serum. Bioanalysis plays a significant role when it comes to the evaluation and interpretation of biology, bioequivalence, and pharmacokinetic data. We can divide bioanalysis into three parts, that is method development, method validation, and further the application of the validated method into the study samples. Why enantiomeric quantitation gained such a significance? So it comes from a historical perspective. There was a drug which was marketed in 1950 and its name was thalidomide. It was used for the treatment of nausea in pregnant women. But in 1961, it was identified that many of the newborns were born with birth defect, and thus there was a ban on this drug, as it was identified that the women who were taking this drug were only giving the birth to newborns with birth defect. So there was an investigation performed, and during the investigation, it was identified that the R enantiomer of thalidomide was effective against morning sickness. However, the S enantiomer was causing the teratogenic effect. This S enantiomer was primarily responsible, and because of this, there was so many birth defects observed in newborns. We can easily see that how dangerous or how if ineffective a drug could be if we have not identified that what is the chirality and how chirality can affect its pharmacology. There are few other many marketed drugs which we know as racemate, and they have different effect of their enantiomers. I have summarized few of them over here. Penicillamine, as we can see, the D form is anti-arthritic, whereas the L forms gives the extremely toxic toxicology. The thalidomide, as we discussed, the R form is sedative, the S form is teratogenic. There are a few other drugs like ketamine, then ethambutol, proxifene, levodopa, where we can observe that the individual enantiomer is having individual effect, and based on that, we need to identify and understand that how effective a racemate could be, and do we need to go with the single enantiomer or not. The regulatory in terms of USFDA and EMA has clearly defined that in which circumstances we need to perform a chiral bioanalysis. And when a biotherapeutic contains either one or two chiral center, it requires quantitation of enantiomers. So as per USFDA, the measurement of individual enantiomer is recommended only when all the following conditions are met. First, if the enantiomers exhibit different pharmacodynamic characteristics. Second, enantiomer exhibit different pharmacokinetic characteristics. Primary efficacy and safety activity resides with the minor enantiomer. Non-linear absorption is present for at least one of the enantiomer. On the other hand, EMEA suggests that individual enantiomer should be measured when all the following conditions are met. The enantiomer exhibit different pharmacokinetics, the enantiomer exhibit different pharmacodynamics. The exposure ratio of enantiomers is modified by a difference in the rate of absorption. On the other hand, they also mention that the individual enantiomers should also be measured if the above conditions are fulfilled and or are not known. If we are not knowing that if any of the conditions, then we need to go with the enantiomeric submission of the data. The method development in bioanalysis is subdivided into three parts: the extraction optimization using the well-known extraction techniques like protein precipitation, liquid extraction, solid phase extraction; mass spectrometric optimization, optimizing the Q1 and Q3 parameters; further, the chromatographic optimization, which has the greater significance when we talk about the chiral bioanalysis, where the selection of stationary phase and the liquid phase is critical. The chromatography for chiral drugs and its resolution is achieved by two basic approaches. First is the direct approach and the other is indirect approach. The direct approach applies the separation of enantiomeric compounds through a chiral stationary phase, whereas using the indirect approach employs reacting the enantiomeric compound with a chiral reagent in a reaction vessel where it forms a covalent bond and diastereomeric derivatives hence, and this is later chromatographically separated on a reverse phase column. So how the indirect method works? We take an analyte which has a chirality where R and S enantiomer exist. We form a derivatization reaction with, say, R chiral derivatizing agent, and we have the compound in RR in terms of analyte and chiral derivatizing agent, and the SR. As the derivatization has happened, later these compound will go on the reverse phase column, and based on the polarity difference and the mobile phase applied, these will be separated on the column. Both the approaches, the direct and the indirect, have their own merits and demerits. As we take on the direct, it requires extensive trials for chromatographic resolution. At the same point, the columns used in the direct approach are expensive, and the solvent compatibility with the mass spec is challenging. We need to always inspect that with the mobile phase used of the non-polar solvents, we might face Q0 charging, or the solvent might not be ionizing it properly. So those kind of effects can be seen when we are developing a method with the direct approach. Oftenly, it has been observed, as we need to go for the direct approach, we observe longer run times. The chromatographic peaks, though, are pure, and we do not have to any impurity. So this is the merit which we have with the direct approach. On the other hand, when we go with the indirect approach, we usually observe good chromatographic properties of the derivatives. Sufficient separation of the formed diastereomers is observed. The columns are inexpensive, as the normal C18 column or the modified chemistry can be used. And we have a range of choice of solvents which are compatible to MS, and we use them in day in, day out. Though it also has its demerits, that it requires extensive sample preparation. The method optimization requires time, and a careful optimization of the derivatization condition is required, because if there is underivatized compound left while performing the derivatization condition, we will observe the impurity peaks, and we will also face the challenges in terms of reproducibility of the results. Taking an example of chromatographic separation as a layman and as a starting point, if I'm taking any of the molecule, I've chosen here the polysaccharide chiral stationary phase. As we move on to these columns, the choice of the selection of polysaccharide chiral stationary phases that they can be used in the reverse phase and the normal phase both. So starting with the reverse phase mode, we can start with buffer, any of the buffer and ACN, or buffer or methanol in a 50-50 ratio. If we are not able to observe a resolution, or the chromatography is not reproducible, we can work on the pH and the organic concentration. At the same time, if we find that there is a chromatographic resolution and we with a larger runtime or with a longer runtime, then we can elute them fastly by reducing the water or the buffer concentration. For the late elution, we can increase the water concentration so that the elution will be late and we can have a proper chromatography or resolution. If there is a poor resolution, we can reduce the organic concentration. When we perform normal phase chromatography with the polysaccharide chiral stationary phase, for an analyte where one functional group or aromatic ring is there, we can start with hexane in combination with 2-propanol with 80-20 ratio as a starting point. Whereas if there are one or more functional group, I would suggest we can also add ethanol to that, and we can proceed with the chromatographic resolution. If we observe a reproducible resolution, then we have the options of increasing the alcohol concentration or decreasing. If there is a poor resolution, we can reduce the alcohol concentration. If we need to optimize the resolution between the enantiomers, we can use triethylamine or diethylamine or any of the other volatile solvents which we are aware of and would be compatible on the mass specs. With the modern day chemistry, there are wide range of chiral stationary phases available. I have summed up few. The stationary phase based on Pringle type or brush type, these have pi donor or pi acceptor properties. The chiral selector within these columns are 3,5-dinitrobenzoyl phenylglycine. These columns can be used in normal and reverse phase both. Further, the polysaccharide chiral stationary phases, these have derivatized cellulose and amylose. As a chiral selector, they have cellulose and cellulose triacetate. These columns also give us the opportunity or the possibility of normal and reverse phases. The example for these kind of column is S and R metoprolol. There are other phases of chiral stationary phase like the cyclodextrines. We have cation exchange resins and the protein as bovine serum, where different chiral selectors of beta cyclodextrin are used. L-proline derivatives, which are covalently bonded to silica gel, are there. Then alpha-1 acid glycoproteins are used. Though these columns have basically the properties of only to be used as reverse phase and does not support much for the normal phase chromatography. As a case study, we have taken the example of acetylene, which is a structural isomer, shows structural isomerism. It is an oral retinoid and it is an active metabolite of etretinate, and it has replaced etretinate as it is 50 times less lipophilic and is able to eliminate much more rapidly. When we see the metabolism of acetylene, then the acetylene forms 13-cis acetylene through a simple isomerization. We can see over here that there is a double bond to which a carboxylic acid is attached, and there is a formation of 13-cis acetylene through a simple isomerization. This structural isomerism is interconvertible, and thus we need to understand if this structural isomerism can impact or not. Luckily, we do not observe any side effect because of this isomerism, but we need to study if we go with acetylene, that how much it is forming or whether there is an impact or not. Here we have shown the example of the achieved chromatographic optimization done at VIDA, where all trans acetylene and 13-cis acetylene was separated. The challenges which acetylene poses are degradation and photoisomerization. So the photoisomerization was controlled by using the dark conditions. The instability further is observed in 13-cis acetylene, which it converts to 9-cis acetylene. This detailed study of understanding of 13-cis acetylene to 9-cis acetylene and if there is further isomerism helps at the drug development stage or at the bioanalysis stage to understand that what might go wrong if there is any formation of isomer which can act or which can act toxic. And if we have a good knowledge at the initial stage itself, we are able to correlate the data when we perform the pharmacokinetic studies. And we can easily see that there is a better resolution between the isomers, and the method was applied to a pharmacokinetic study. Another example is of ibuprofen. The ibuprofen is a drug which is used for anti-inflammatory activity, and its anti-inflammatory main activity exclusively is due to the S enantiomer. The R enantiomer here is biotransformed, that is chiral inversion unidirectionally to S enantiomer in humans. So as we discussed, since there is a chiral inversion of R to S, if there would have been a toxicological effect, the drug might have failed at the initial phase of development. However, as it is not, so it has been successfully used, and we are using it a lot for the anti-inflammatory activities. The ibuprofen possesses the analgesic effect, anti-inflammatory, and the antipyretic properties, and it decreases the formation of prostaglandin precursors. It has been shown that the pharmacokinetic behavior of the 2-ibuprofen enantiomer depends on the stereoselectivity in the deposition kinetics. The ibuprofen, as an example, was developed using both the indirect approach and the direct approach. As we see in the indirect approach, there was a well optimization of the methodology so that we have a method where proper derivatization was happening using different derivatizing agent. Here the chiral derivatizing agent used was S-naphthylethylamine, and the derivatized ibuprofen was formed. This was was done post extraction. Whereas there could be a methodology where you can run a chromatography, you have a chiral diazotizing agent in the mobile phase, it couples during the elution, and you have a chromatography of the separation through the diastereomers. On the other hand, we also had developed a method with the direct approach where a simple extraction of ibuprofen was performed. This extracted ibuprofen was further separated into S and R ibuprofen on a chiral column using a polar mobile phase. There are the two chromatographies shown. With the indirect approach, we were able to have a proper resolution of the column on Gemini C18 column, which is rather inexpensive when we talk, though this approach required extensive sample preparation. On the other hand, the direct approach was used for by using a chiral column, where chiral column used was Lux cellulose column. This column was employed with a normal phase mobile phase, and we were able to achieve the chromatography here also. And it was a simple extraction of ibuprofen, which was rather easy to optimize. Another example is metoprolol. The metoprolol is used for the treatment of hypertension and angina pectoris, and for several other cardiovascular diseases. We see that S-metoprolol has significantly higher receptor affinity, which is about 500-fold compared to R antibody. This drug is dosed as a racemate. We developed a methodology here at VIDA using the direct approach with the chiral column. We can see that there is not much of a pharmacokinetic difference in the S-metoprolol and R-metoprolol, and that is why when we see the drug is being marketed as a racemate and is taken by the heart patients as a racemate. So when we talk about the chirality, it is a really important aspect as during the drug development, because if we know that what is happening in terms of chirality, we will be able to identify that what possible biological and the pharmacological variations are there between the two enantiomers, and can they undermine the clinical experience. If we have a very good experience of from the initial phase itself, we will be able to understand that what is causing what effect, and if there is a untoward or unexpected behavior observed in the pharmacological behavior of a drug, we will be able to correlate it, whether it could be because of an enantiomer or something happened in vivo with the particular drug, which resulted into that toxicological effect. Knowing that a single enantiomer formulation can be developed, we can provide enhanced selectivity. Dosing a drug which as a racemate where one enantiomer is inactive is something that we are taking it but does not provide us any benefit. So the enhanced selectivity, then a combination of enantiomers in the biological purpose is received when we take a single enantiomer. We will have enhanced therapeutic index and a better pharmacokinetics. It is such that if you are taking a drug with a racemate in a racemate form where one enantiomer is inactive and both exist in a 50-50 ratio, you can simply take a 5 milligram of dose and you will have the same impact. So what I would say that when there is a drug development, if we emphasize on the chirality and we study its effect, it would be always better that we have a single enantiomer developed and that is being marketed and dosed when it comes to the clinical studies and to the human population. These are the list of chiral methods which we are having at VIDA, and with the vast experience which we have for the chiral drug development, we are able to handhold our sponsors. We can help them in their complex method developments for a chiral molecule, and we can provide them faster output. VIDA has the capability to develop methods with lower quantification level of up to 0.1 pg. We have almost 990 validated methods which are available with different generics, NCs, pharmacodynamic studies, and immunogenicity. We have almost 65 complex methods for including endogenous molecules, hormones, steroids, amino acids, elemental bioanalysis, immunogenicity, and large molecules and ELISA analysis. We have done more than 300 BAB studies with incurred sample reproducibility of greater than 98%. So we can always count on that we have very good developed validated methods. We work as a central lab for phase 2 and phase 3 studies and tissue distribution studies. With vast molecule experience for different NCs, we are able to provide a hand-holding to our sponsors for their NC molecules. We can offer all services, including the project management, lab manual preparation, kit preparation, supply sample storage management, and lead testing, report preparation for multi-site studies. Protocol preparation and resolution to sponsor, regulatory queries by dedicated project management teams are part of it. The lab manual preparation of lab manuals includes the sample collection procedure and sample handling. We also provide kit supplies to through a dedicated team to different sites. PK sample handling by trained custodian team is being done. We also provide the sponsor-specific reports for ECTD through trained and dedicated report writing team. Thank you. Over to you, Yuvragi.
Thank you, Mr. Primal, for nicely covering importance of chirality, talking about direct and indirect approaches, and using various case studies for better understanding. Now, moving on, we will be proceeding ahead towards our panel discussion round, where we are going to answer some of really interesting questions. My very first question is for Dr. Venu, but before asking the question, I would like to give a little introduction of him. Dr. Venu Madhav has a PhD in pharmacy with an MBA in finance and has 25 plus years of vast experience in CROs and pharmaceutical companies. He has a demonstrated expertise in executing biostudies for different formulations like injectables, nasal sprays, and topical preparations besides conventional dosage forms. He has been responsible for developing complex bioanalytical methods for hormonal and peptide products. My question to Dr. Venu is, there are two different approaches, that is direct and indirect, which were also discussed during the presentation. According to you, which approach is better? Over to you, Dr. Venu.
Thank you, Ragi, for giving this opportunity. First of all, both the approaches are acceptable as long as each approach is supported by appropriate validation data, even though each approach have their own merits and demerits as explained by Dr. Primal Sharma. But the indirect method is always having an additional step of derivatization, which involves a good number of method parameters to be optimized and validated. Hence, if the appropriate stationary phase is available and isomer separation is possible, it is always better to go for the direct approach for the isomer separation. If that is not possible, then better to go for indirect approach. Thank you. Over to you, Raj.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for nice question for us. My next question is for Ms. Swati Guttikar. She has a vast experience of 27 years in the bioanalytical field. She's master's in pharmacy with specialization in pharmaceutical chemistry and has technical and scientific expertise. Under her leadership, the team comprises of almost 300 trained staff, and she has been associated with VIDA since its inception. My question for Ms. Swati is, considering a scenario of a pharmaceutical drug which has low bioactivity for 1 enantiomer, but is dosed as a racemate, in such a scenario, how can we handle the pharmacokinetics and statistical data reporting? Over to you, Swati ma'am.
Yeah, thank you, Ragi, for this panel discussion. Like the synthetic drugs, which has the chirality inherited within that, there are issues with the development and the synthesis of the individual isomers, considering the cost factor also. So one isomer may have more activity, the other isomer may have low activity or no activity at all. So if we consider the classic example of the geometric isomerism phytonadione, which exists in the E form and the Z form, that is the trans phytonadione and the cis phytonadione. So in this case, the cis phytonadione has very low activity, but we have to analyze it individually as an isomer And this data is given as a supporting evidence in the main pharmacokinetic and statistical report. Thank you. I hope I have answered the question.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you for answering this for us. I have another question for one of our panelists, Dr. Tulsidas Mishra. My question to you, sir, is in dosed racemic pharmaceutical drug where the efficacy of one isomer is less, sometimes we quantitate the drug as a racemate, whereas sometimes we perform the individual isomeric analysis. What is the reason for such difference in measurement? Over to you, Dr. Tulsidas.
Yeah, thank you, Ravi. Actually, this is a nice question because of the regulatory guidance differences. Sometimes we measure the racemate and sometimes we measure the isomers because of the difference in the US or the EU guidances. So for the bioanalysis of drug, there are different regulatory requirements. If all the full requirements are fulfilled, then we need to do the isomeric analysis for this, like PK, PD, and efficacy differences, what we have presented in the presentation itself. For the US FDA, we have the OGD guidances available for the product specific things. And for the EU, we have the PAR guidance for the product specific. If it is not available, then the product specific knowledge will be helpful for the deciding factor. If the bioequivalence we will talk, then there is a different rate of absorption may be there for the different isomers. So maybe chiral requirement is there. Like example, we have already taken like ibuprofen, where the slight difference is there and there is a minor difference in the another isomer, but it is not having significant impact on the bioequivalence criteria. So now the revised version of EU guidances also recommend the racemic analysis. So this depends on totally on the compound and their specific knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I have one more question for our panelist, Mr. Ajay Gupta. My question to you, sir, is chirality has been known for long and we are taking drugs in racemate form. So why is it important to produce single enantiomer drugs? Over to you, Dr. Ajay.
Thanks, Yoragi. Actually, the chirality has been known for long to pharmaceutical industry, and we have learned a lot from the history of enantiomer drug. It is necessary as one enantiomer may be responsible for the therapeutic effect of drug, whereas the other enantiomer is inactive, or we can say contribute undesirable effect. In such a case, use of single enantiomers would provide a superior medications and may be preferred over the racemic form of the drug. Let us take an example of cetirizine, which is used to relieve the symptoms of allergy. Generally, we take 10 mg dose of cetirizine as a racemate form. However, when we take the single enantiomers, that is levocetirizine, it is recommended as 5 mg dose. So 5 mg dose of levocetirizine provide the same therapeutic effect as 10 mg dose of racemic cetirizine. Therefore, with single enantiomers, we can take less dose and getting the same therapeutic effect. Thanks, Ravi.
Thank you, Dr. Ajay. Thank you for nicely answering and covering this question. Also, thank you, Dr. Venu, Ms. Swati, and Dr. Tulsidas for your active participation in this panel discussion and nicely answering to most of our audience's questions. I would like to take a pause over here. And we understand that this session has kept us all well engaged throughout. But due to time constraints, we would not be able to take any further questions at this point of time. But please be rest assured that we will be sending the answers to each and every question of yours via emails. Also, we will be sending across the recorded link of this webinar on all the registered email IDs. Lastly, I, on behalf of Vida Clinical Research, would like to sincerely thank you all for being here today and taking out the time to be a part of this webinar. I would also like to extend our gratitude to Mr. Primal for being such a wonderful presenter and giving us all great learnings today. We at Vida Clinical Research earnestly look forward to host you all again. Till then, take care and stay safe, everyone.
Thank you.